But I think this is the most egregious example yet. For Graham to be met at Heathrow after a 9 hour transatlantic flight by five armed police officers, and then arrested, interrogated, and kept in a cell for 16 hours, and only released when his blood pressure became so high that he had to go straight to A&E at 4 o'clock in the morning, all for three tweets taking the mickey out of trans activists. It absolutely beggars belief.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. Today I'm joined by our writer Toby Young, who is also the director of the Free Speech Union, because on Monday, Graham Linehan, who is a comedian and the co-creator of Father Ted, was arrested when he came off a plane coming from the US. He was arrested over some tweets that he made that were deemed threatening, and this has thrown up a huge conversation about free speech laws in the UK. Now, Toby, thank you for joining me on Spectator TV. Could you tell us about the story?
Well, we've come across some pretty terrible examples of the overzealous policing of social media posts at the Free Speech Union, and it's becoming increasingly common. But I think this is the most egregious example yet. For Graham to be met at Heathrow after a 9 hour transatlantic flight by five armed police officers, and then arrested, interrogated, and kept in a cell for 16 hours, and only released when his blood pressure became so high that he had to go straight to A&E at 4 o'clock in the morning, all for three tweets taking the mickey out of trans activists. It absolutely beggars belief. Why are the police wasting their time in this way when there are so many real crimes they could be investigating? Only one in five reported shoplifting incidents is looked into by the police. The rest of the time, they ignore those reports. I think in 23, I looked this up yesterday, only 25% of burglaries were investigated. Anyone who's reported a burglary or auto theft or their child getting mugged on the bus on the way to school will know just how little interest the police take in these routine crimes. But say something that antagonizes a trans rights activist on Twitter, and five armed police officers will meet your plane at Heathrow.
I just want to read the tweets because if any of our viewers aren't on X, they might not have seen them and they can judge themselves if it was so offensive he needed to be arrested. The first one was, if a trans-identified male is in a female-only space, he is committing a violent, abusive act. Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls. Then the next one is a picture of a trans rally captioned, a photo you can smell. Not really sure what that means, but still. And the final one says, I hate them, misogynists and homophobes. F them. There's obviously a swear word in that. Some could say that that is threatening language. And the reason why Lucy Connolly was sent to jail, and you've had big legal specialists like Jonathan Sumption argue that what Lucy Connolly said was threatening, it can incite violence. Graham Linehan has suggested that we punch trans people in the balls.
Well, I think it may seem more menacing than he intended it to be. I think the point he was making, in a way he thought was humorous, was that trans women are men. They have testicles. I think Jonathan Sumption is wrong about Lucy Connolly. To begin with, inciting violence isn't a crime. There is no crime, no offence on the statute books containing those words. And when the police originally issued a statement, the Metropolitan Police, about why they'd arrested Graham, they said they were looking into whether he had committed the crime of inciting violence. There is no such crime. There is a crime against stirring up hatred. You can be prosecuted for stirring up racial hatred, religious hatred, or hatred against someone or a group based on their sexual orientation. But there is no crime in England and Wales whereby you can be prosecuted for stirring up hatred against someone or a group of people based on their transgender status. The police revised their statement, the Met revised their statement and said that actually they were looking at Graham under Part 3A of the Public Order Act. But that makes it an offence to stir up religious hatred or hatred against someone or a group of people on the basis of their sexual orientation. Doesn't mention transgender status. In Scotland, the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act does make it a criminal offence to stir up hatred on the basis of transgender status, but that's not a criminal offence in England and Wales. So it really isn't clear what offence the police are looking at Graham for here, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the end they decide to take no further action. At which point, I think Graham will have a strong case for wrongful arrest and false imprisonment, and the Free Speech Union is going to be helping him with that.
Toby, who could you explain to the viewer how the process works from someone makes a tweet, presumably somebody's taken offence to it, so they've complained to the police. Who in the police picks this up? And then how is it discussed within the police? Who makes the order in which they decide to put out an arrest warrant for Graham Linehan? And I'm trying to get an understanding for how politicised the police really is.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the process works, and um, I dare say there isn't a standard process.
Mm.
When you, I think, when the police hand over all the relevant documents, in this case, to Graham's solicitor, we'll find out, I think, a bit more about the process that was followed. But it certainly seems to be the case that the police take complaints by trans rights activists much more seriously than they do from gender critical feminists. I mean, we know from seeing protesters outside events like the LGB Alliance's annual conference that they quite often hold up placards saying things like, the only turf is a good turf and punch a turf. And the police never arrest them for quote unquote inciting violence. So it does seem as though the police are much more likely to take complaints from particular sacred victim groups much more seriously than general complaints about the same thing.
And it was interesting to see Connolly's response in an interview with Alison Pearson, Toby, because recently a Labour councillor was found not guilty when he suggested that far-right activists should have their throats slit. And he was spared from jail, but Lucy Connolly was sent to jail. So that's another suggestion that there is two-tier policing going on. But do you think it's just that the police haven't caught up with the public's perspective on this?
I think the police, I mean, the impression you get is that the police have been captured by radical progressive ideology and now see one of their most important roles as being protecting these beleaguered victim groups, these so-called victims of historical injustice. Um, uh, uh, the reason I think Jonathan Sumption is wrong about Lucy Connolly is, I mean, he said what she said incited violence, and therefore she deserved to go to jail. The right to free speech doesn't include the right to incite violence. Um, I mean, even if we park the point that there is no criminal offence which makes reference to inciting violence on the statute books, um, I don't think that she did straightforwardly incite violence, or could have been. I think had she pled not guilty, like Ricky Jones, I think she might well have been acquitted. I think her defence would have been twofold. First of all, the offence she pleaded guilty to, which was intending to stir up racial hatred, had she pleaded not guilty to that offence, I think it would have been possible to mount a reasonable defence because the target of her tweet were residents of asylum hotels? And is it stirring up racial hatred? Is it intending to stir up racial hatred if you are intending to stir up hatred against residents of asylum hotels because they don't all belong to one particular race?
Mm.
So I think you could have mounted a defence on those grounds. But in addition, she added the words "for all I care" in her tweet. Burn down all the effing asylum hotels for all I care, which suggests indifference as to whether her followers take her up on that, rather than inciting her followers to do exactly that. So I think a defence could have been mounted on those grounds too. So I think Lord Sumption, who I hugely admire, uh, is setting the bar a little bit too low on this one. I don't think Lucy deserved to go to jail. Had she said what she said in the United States, it would have unquestionably been protected by the First Amendment. And I think we should have similar protections in this country.
The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has come out and said in response to Linehan's arrest that free speech laws need to be changed in Britain. What exactly needs to change so that people like Lucy Colony, like Jamie Michael, who we had on Spectator TV in the past, and Graham Linehan don't have the same fate?
Wes Streeting seems to be assuming that Graham Linehan is going to be charged and has committed a criminal offence. And I'm not sure that's the case. And I'd be surprised if he is charged. I think this is a case of police overreach, the police being far too overzealous in their policing of social media posts at the behest of a trans rights activist. I can't see what criminal offence Graham has committed here. And the fact that the Metropolitan Police Press Office have come up with two potential offences now, and may yet come up with another one, I'm told, suggests that they don't really have a clue what offence it is they believe Graham Linehan has committed. So, in order to protect people like Graham from this kind of harassment from the police, we don't need to change the law. We need to make sure the police themselves are better educated about what the law actually says. And I think there's a really strong case for including in basic police training some training about what legal protections there are for free speech in this country, because they are routinely ignored by the police. They receive training on all kinds of DEI gobbledygook, but very little, if any, about the need to protect free speech and uphold the laws protecting free speech. But having said that, of course, our laws do need to be reformed. There are far too many fetters on our free speech on the statute books. Section 207 of the Communications Act, which makes it a criminal offence to send a grossly offensive message, that needs to be repealed. The Malicious Communications Act needs to be repealed. The Free Speech Union is currently making a list of all those laws fettering our free speech that we think a future government should repeal. It's good news if a Labour cabinet member is coming round to that point of view too. My fear is that Labour are about to put more laws on the statute books fettering our free speech, not remove any of the existing laws, but perhaps if they're having a rethink about that, we should welcome it.
Toby Young, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV.